When Brian came through the in-gate, everybody paid attention. He was deadly accurate, but he did it with style and he did it with class.
I don't know that there's another professional that has done every job in this business. He was a rider, he was head of the hunter committee, he was a show manager, he did so many things that I think that that was part of his gift to all of us, is that he knew the roles so well.
I was fortunate enough actually to have grown up on a horse farm in Massachusetts, about 20, 25 miles outside of Boston. And my mom was a rider in her time, and a very good one, a very famous one. She's purported to have been the first lady to ride so-called forward seat. That's what it was called at that time.
Brian's mother was a great rider. She rode for many of the top stables of that day.
My beginning with the sport really is it's luck more than it's anything else. It just was a rather unnatural thing for me to blend into. I certainly had never imagined in my life that I'd be doing this for what I do for a living. When I grew up, I played baseball, hockey a lot. Those are my two favorite sports.
He loves his sports. He's a great sports analyst. He always picks the top four in the basketball, and a great Patriots fan, of course. He's a little fanatic about it, but that's good.
Riding was just something that was always around. The horses were always around, but as far as looking forward to doing it for a career, honestly, with not a bit of a lie, it never crossed my mind.
I think Brian, as a rider, I think it was easy for him, or he made it look like it was easy for him. He had so much talent, not only as a rider, but just as an athlete. He had a great sense of rhythm. He had a great sense of pace. He had all the ingredients to be a great rider, and it worked.
If you're serious about it, you need to want to learn, and you want to learn from the best. And I was just so fortunate in my life and in my career to have had professionals that went before me and people that were still active in the sport, very generous with their time, very generous with their opinion.
Brian was a great rider. He was the go-to guy for many stables. He catch rode a lot of horses. He wasn't always at those stables training those horses, but he was a great catch rider, one of the very best ever. And he rode a number of horses in the early days for Emerson Burr. He rode horses for Susie Shelkoff and her wonderful client, Helen Lenahan.
He actually started my career and SBS Farms' career off to such an amazing start with horses like Gabriel and Night Owl, and it was a time that we really had a great rapport together and a great working arrangement together.
Gabriel was he was a tough one for sure, but he's not a horse you would look at and think of as, wow, this is one of the best I ever rode. But he damn near won more than any horse I ever rode. With the career and all that I've done, it's in the end, I guess, a lot more about the horses than I would have ever imagined it would be. Some of the best memories that I have would be of some of the horses that I rode that were genuinely great ones. I rode a horse called Temple Place. He was just one of my favorite horses, and he was owned by a customer of ours from Massachusetts.
His riding abilities were definite. He was as good a horseman with a horse's front end as I've ever seen. And you know, just besides my horses, there were many, many horses that were Horse of the Year and Square Lakes and Romp Around, and the list goes on and on and on.
I just enjoyed that thoroughly and enjoyed learning what I learned from them and with them.
One of my fondest memories of Brian was always his sense of humor. He always, whether we were winning classes or losing classes or he was the manager of the show, He has a really unique and fun sense of humor, which he still has to this day.
A lot of things you get to choose in life, I suppose. One of the things you don't get to choose, I think, are your best friends, and Jimmy is mine, for whatever it's worth. And he's as unusual, I think, as I am in a very, very different sense. My meeting with Jim transpired at the end of an under-saddle class.
I was getting the numbers.
The fellow who had put on my saddle had inflicted to notice that the girth had been severed. So I started shifting around in the saddle back and forth.
And all of a sudden, Brian had fallen off his horse in the lineup and is laying on the ground.
Jimmy, to his credit, was standing there, kind of walked over and looked down.
The quick wit that he was, as I remember, he said,
"Mr. Lee, would third place still be possible?" I kind of left that very first time I met the man.
but that was a memory, obviously, a unique situation. Well, I have spent a lot of time judging with Brian. Most recently, I judged the final round of the $500,000 Hunter Prix up in Saugerties. Brian never missed a single thing. Not only the correctness of the round, but the very fine things about the horse's form, or he did a little this, or what'd you think about that?
I love to judge. I mean, the more judging I did, the more I liked it. And that I've always wondered whether that says something positive or negative about me, but I actually I just enjoy doing it. I enjoy the days. I enjoy what they are, the length and the intensity of them. The application process then was ridiculously simple. Pretty much you're right in and good, glad you called, you can have one. It's a little different once you get into actually doing it, because that I've judged an awful lot of horse shows. I'm fortunate to have been able to do as many as I have done. It was Gene Cunningham, I think, told me a long time ago when I just began judging. He said, "Bud, you'll never do anything more humbling in your life than judging a horse show. And if it doesn't humble you, you don't get it." He was right. I did 3 terms as Hunter Committee Chairman, and a lot of great times, a lot of great memories, and great individuals that I got to work with and work against a lot of the time.
In the various committees, mostly the Hunter Committee that Brian was involved with, Brian always could analyze things very well. And we'd be mumbling around and fumbling around, and what about this and what about that? And he'd be, most of the time, quite patient, and he'd let us kind of do our thing, and then he'd sort of bring it all together. We would always say, well, why didn't we think of that? Brian was always at least a couple steps ahead of us.
The increment system at the outset was intended to do nothing more than to add and create order. How do we translate good numerically? Simple idea, and it really is a simple idea. It stumped me for a long time, I'll tell you. Woo. That was what it was all about, and we did eventually succeed.
I think that was his gift to everybody, that he knew about governance and he knew how to get that increment system passed, and he was very influential in our time.
It took a while, and it was a very difficult sell in a lot of cases. I don't think I've ever had a harder sell of a concept or of an idea. I can guarantee I've never had one that I've believed more in than the increment system, given what I knew the sport so badly needed. Anybody, I guess, in our business that gets into show management, they get into it because they ride and they train, and because at some point along the line they have a horse show at their farm sooner or later. And I thought they were great. I couldn't wait to learn more about them, and I sure did. The things I had to learn despite having spent years in the horse business, riding, training, that kind of thing, that's a different world, a different game altogether. I was fortunate again to have been very close to some people who were excellent at it that, as was the case with judging in many cases, took me under their wing and just asked me to shut up and listen, and I was more than pleased to do it.
Brian was Mr. Cool as a horse show manager. Everything went smoothly. It was really amazing.
There's so many shows that should be really thankful that Brian was involved with. He's so bright, and there's just so many things that he did that were right in this industry, and we're all very lucky to have had him touch our lives and be part of what he did to make things better. He changed lives in the hunter world.
Brian was a top-class baseball player. And looking back, Brian has played all the innings. He's touched every base. Riding, managing, course designing, announcing, judging. He touched them all. The most important is home plate, and that's where he hit a Grand Slam home run when he married his beautiful wife, Nancy, and they raised their daughter, Ashley.
Looking back on it, I've been so fortunate in my life to have been subject to and become friends of some of the very best horsemen that ever lived. Back at the time when they didn't know me from a hole in the wall, they were very generous with their time, very generous with their opinion. To have them be so generous with me about what they taught me. And you're not going to agree with everything you hear, but the very best always have a good reason for it. They knew what they're doing, and every step that they take, if it's judging a horse show we're talking about or training a horse, every single step that you take means something, and you do it for a reason. And it all translates into something down the road that hopefully is going to be as good as there is. If it isn't, you're doing it for the wrong reason.